Good morning, everyone. I thank you for being here. You know, for 40 years, I dedicated my career to working in law enforcement, 12 of which was as sheriff of Jacksonville, Florida. So I know firsthand the responsibility law enforcement officers feel as they prepare every day to go out and put their lives on the line for their community. That is the fundamental sacrifice officers make to protect their fellow citizens and allow us to feel safe in our neighborhoods and our homes. Now, over the past few years, you've heard these calls to defund the police, and they have swept across the nation. This has demoralized and delegitimized the brave men and women who enforce our laws every day. It's no wonder law enforcement officers across our nation are now facing some of the toughest working conditions in years, to say nothing of the prosecutors and district attorneys who are failing to do their job to keep criminals off the street. This has led to a spike in violent crime that has made cities across America less safe than they were 3 years ago. And according to the FOP's most recent report, just this year, 135 officers have been shot. 15 officers have been killed by gunfire already this year. The amount of officers shot in the line of duty is up 52% from this time 3 years ago. 52%. 38, listen to this number, 38 ambush-style attacks on law enforcement officers simply because they are law enforcement officers. 43 officers were shot in those ambush-style attacks. Folks, this violence cannot be tolerated, and we're not going to tolerate it. We must respond with serious action to prevent attacks against police officers. And that is why we are here today. Because together we can send a message to those who target our officers. If you want to target the police, this Congress, this bilateral group, bipartisan group, bilateral too. We are going to target you. You target the police, this Congress is going to target you. And I'm proud to be joined here by my colleagues and friend Josh Gottheimer and Pete Stauber, who have worked diligently with me to reintroduce the Protect and Serve Act, our bipartisan legislation that will protect our men and women in blue. Now, the Protect and Serve Act creates federal penalties for individuals who deliberately, as I mentioned earlier, if you deliberately attack the police in the line of duty and purposely harm them in execution of a crime, a penalty of up to 10 years imprisonment for someone who attacks and injures an officer, and a penalty of life in prison for someone who kills or kidnaps a police officer. And last week I had the honor of commemorating Florida's fallen officers at our national memorial. And we must never forget those officers who have given their lives in service to our community. And with that, I want to toss it to my good friend from New Jersey, a real supporter of law enforcement in this Congress, Josh Gottheimer.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sheriff. Thanks, Sheriff.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Well said, Sheriff.
Thanks. Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you for your unbelievable leadership. Both, service here and, of course, all the service you gave us for so many years, you too, sir. Thank you so much. Very grateful. I do want to thank the tens of thousands of law enforcement officers and their families who are here in our nation's capital for Police Week. We are beyond grateful for your service. Americans across our nation honor and remember the more than 26,300 law enforcement officers who've sacrificed their lives in the line of duty, protecting us and our great country. I'm very proud to have led the bipartisan resolution which passed the House this week memorializing those tragically killed in the line of duty, and of course joining Mr. Rutherford in his excellent legislation. I know he honors their memory every day, as we all do, those of us standing here, as well as Mr. Stauber behind us, who also served, and very grateful for your service as well, sir. Each and every day, law enforcement, as Mr. Rutherford said, they put on a bulletproof vest, they kiss their spouses and children goodbye, and then put their lives on the line every day to protect us. As hard as it is to be in law enforcement on a good day, it's even harder these days. These officers literally put their lives on the line every time they pull over or chase down a vehicle, enter a home with a domestic dispute, administer Narcan, chase down a criminal, handle a hate crime, confront a robber or even a terrorist. Are they carrying a knife? Are they carrying a gun? Will they pull over? Will they even roll down their window and hand over their license? We know that's a question law enforcement has to ask every single day. We know this is a time when, as Mr. Rutherford said, when violent crime is rising. The number of deadly shootings is increasing, up 30% in Jersey since the beginning of the pandemic. Carjackings are up nearly 30% in major cities across the country compared to the pre-pandemic levels. And FBI data on hate crimes released last month shows a nearly 12% increase in incidents, with nearly 65% being racially motivated. All this going on, and our officers are being targeted and attacked. As Mr. Yo, who's here from the FOP, does a phenomenal job representing law enforcement. You know, it's his report. As they reported, 331 officers were shot in the line of duty and 89 ambush-style attacks were carried out on officers as of this November. Every day it seems like police officers are being attacked wherever they go. That's why I'm not only very proud to support this bipartisan Protect and Serve Act moving forward to get the backs of those who get ours and impose federal penalties on those who deliberately target law enforcement, but we need to go beyond that and make sure these criminals are brought to justice. On top of that, and I'm very proud that Mr. Rutherford is also, we've worked very hard on the bipartisan, bicameral, also bilateral Invest to Protect Act, which has such broad support that the head of the Congressional Black Caucus supports it and is leading it along with Anthony D'Esposito, who was a former NYPD detective. Not from Jersey, but from New York, it's good enough. The Invest Protect Act helps smaller departments train, recruit, and retain officers and support their mental health. And it was developed through conversations together with this bottom line point, and then I'll finish. You can't cut or defund your way to safer communities and better police departments. Instead, it's about investing to protect. We must invest in our officers. We must invest in our departments. That's the way to make them even better than they are today. And if we work together, and the greatest country in the world will always be better. And that's what we should focus on, getting the backs of those who get ours and focusing on the greatest country the world has ever known. So thank you. God bless. John, thank you for bringing us all together today.
Well,
Thanks.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you.
Let me introduce from Minnesota, a great but cold state with a weak football team, the great Pete Stauber.
Well, thanks, Josh.
Very nice.
You know, it's no coincidence that ambushes of law enforcement officers are on the rise, and there have been 27 ambusher-style attacks this year alone. It's clear we are moving in the wrong direction, and that's why I'm proud to join Sheriff Rutherford, Congressman Gottheimer, and a bipartisan group of my colleagues in supporting the Protect and Serve Act. The bill rightly places federal penalties on individuals who ambush law enforcement officers. In my 23 years with the Duluth, Minnesota Police Department, I served with some of the most honorable and compassionate people I've ever had the privilege of meeting. They became police officers because they love their community and they want to make a difference. I know that these dedicated men and women serve to protect our communities each day, and they do an excellent job, and we must have their backs. I think the most important thing that we can talk about today is the culture in our society who continues to demonize law enforcement. As was just spoken, we must fund our police departments. We must encourage recruitment, retention within our police departments. That's going to help with morale. We want the best and the brightest serving in our communities. If you talk to any law enforcement executive, it's the recruitment and the retention that's of primary importance. And it is because of the defund and the disparage the police movement. We want these men and women to know that not only in the halls of Congress, but their local elected officials also support them. I think that it goes without saying that legislation like this helps to improve morale and keep our men and women safe. As a police officer, I never got to choose which 911 call was assigned to me. If I was called to a shooting 3 down, I couldn't get on the radio and say, no, I'm going to go to that minor crash by the mall. I went and used our training to the best of our ability and had to make split-second decisions. I myself am a victim of 2 violent gun crimes. I survived a shooting to the head on December 15th of 1995 at 10:32 p.m. at the intersection of 6th Avenue East and 4th Street in Duluth, Minnesota, by a career criminal. We must hold these folks accountable. To the men and women in law enforcement, in this Congress, we will always have your backs. And lastly, to the families of law enforcement, we know that you are worried when your loved one goes and serves. We will always have your backs, and we will always keep you in our prayers. It is now my privilege to introduce the FOP National President, Patrick Yos.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. First, let me thank Congressman for introducing this very important bill. You know, just 4 days ago, not far from this location, across this country, law enforcement officers' families came and we were honored the lives of 443 officers who died in the line of duty across this country just in 1 year. 443. You know, some succumb after long, valiant fights with illness caused by their jobs themselves, and others never had the opportunity to return home at the end of their shifts. You know, the FOP identified this very critical and very disturbing trend happening across this country and started collecting data in 2015 of the attacks on law enforcement officers. All law enforcement officers shot in the line of duty. No one was collecting this data. To address that, we started working with Congress and developed the Protect and Serve Act, something that is sorely needed in order to protect our profession. Just a few years ago, in 2018, the House Judiciary Committee passed this bill, and it went to the floor during Police Week in 2018, and it passed with a lopsided vote of 382 to 35. 382 to 35, and it failed to move through the process and died. Now, I'm going to tell you what's tragic. What's tragic is since that day, things have only got more dangerous. Since that time, and the House had voted in 2018 to do this, 1,580 officers were shot across this country in the line of duty. Nearly 20% were in ambush attacks. This is unacceptable. Congress has literally done nothing to address the violence towards law enforcement officers, and it's time for it to happen now. If this devastating statistic happened to any other profession in America, we would see press conferences, we would see hearings, we would demands that something be done. But somehow law enforcement officers are not recognized for the sacrifice they have. Let me tell you what the reality of it is. Law enforcement officers, some 800,000 of us across this country, show up to work every single day. We have a servant heart. We are ordinary people that are called upon at times to do extraordinary things. And when you need help, you call 911 and a police officer comes. Well, police officers across this country right now are dialing 911 for Congress to come and help us. It's time for the violence towards law enforcement officers, those people who are dedicated to protecting the safety and quality of life within their communities. It's time for Congress to recognize and support law enforcement for what they do and the services they provide to this country. Thank you.
Very nice. Excellent.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to introduce from the state of Texas, the great state of Texas, a dear friend, and his father was a former director of the FBI, Pete Sessions. Pete?
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Congressman Pete Sessions from the 17th District of Texas. In the past week in the 17th District of Texas, Cameron, Texas, we had a police officer in a call that was made to 911, showed up to help in a domestic dispute to save a wife who had been injured. He was shot and killed. This is happening all across America, where people believe it's okay to shoot a police officer, men or women who show up because they were asked to come and help people. As a proud member of the National Rifle Association, we consider our duty and honor to represent citizenry and to help people without law enforcement. But when a law enforcement officer shows up, we willingly give them not only the opportunity, but the respect to solve the crimes that are in their midst.
Increasingly across this country, we have seen where there are radical criminal gangs that move across state lines, that come to Washington, D.C. or other areas to commit crimes that include fighting with, injuring, or taking prisoner law enforcement officers. We must stand up and say that we will be a messaging element with the process of the law, that we will protect our law enforcement officers. We need them and their families to know that the American people proudly support law enforcement. We support them against criminals and thugs who would take advantage of normal citizens. But when they target a police officer, that they will be hit with an additional penalty, and that is that the federal government has an intrinsic interest in protecting them and their families wherever they are in the United States of America. So I'm proud to join not only this group of people, members of Congress, who are going to stand up and proactively say, we are not going to defund our police. We're going to support our men and women of law enforcement because they are there dedicated to us. Thank you for being here today, and I'd now like to bring back Sheriff Rutherford for any closing comments he'd like to make.
Thank you, Pete. I appreciate that. Before we close, I'm going to call up another tremendous servant in law enforcement from the state of Texas, Sheriff Troy Nails.
Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate my colleagues behind me. I think it's a sad day that we have to get up here and actually hold press conferences that ask Congress and people around the communities and the nation to support law enforcement. We should support law enforcement every day of the week, 365 days a year. But we have to have press conferences to actually try to say, hey, people, do me a favor, Congress. Would you support the men and women in blue, the men and women that are out there protecting you each and every day, the men and women that are putting their lives on the line for you each and every day? For $70,000, you can make more at Buc-ee's at a gas station. For $70,000, men and women every day are committed to serving their communities, and then what are they doing? They're being attacked. They're being attacked by some of the nut jobs we have in Congress and all these different activist groups out there. It's sad. I did it for 30 years. I know Sheriff Rutherford did it for longer than that. I don't know if I could start all over again. And then you have these officers being attacked, and they're being attacked each and every day. I think the gentleman with the Fraternal Order of Police was talking about statistics. And why are officers being attacked? Why are we seeing an increase? It's because the attacks are being encouraged by some on the far left in the defund the police movement. So go attack that officer. And then you've got absolute nut jobs like Alvin Bragg in Manhattan. He's up there. And he seems to be more concerned about the suspect that attacked the officer and more concerned about that guy's rights. Then you got the law enforcement officer trying to survive so he can go back home to his family. And then they want to try to indict him for something. And it's just not the attacks on law enforcement, it's the attacks on the people, the community. Look at that guy up there a couple weeks ago on the train. The guy's out there arrested 44 times. He's telling people he wants to kill people. So then you find a Marine that's trying to say, hey, let me help you out here. The Good Samaritan. Why in the hell would anybody in this country ever want to be a Good Samaritan anymore? To try to step up and say, you know what, I want to try to help people around me, keep everybody safe. When you have nut jobs like Alvin Bragg out there, now we want to charge the Good Samaritan. And sadly, it's all about race. There are individuals in this country that are trying to divide the American people. They're trying to divide the black and the white. A good question for Alvin Bragg would be, if the Marine would have been black, would you really be charging him with anything? But in the end, it probably wouldn't have made the news. Wouldn't have made the news. Because it would go against their narrative. I just think, a majority of the American people support their law enforcement today. But the dangerous part is the 2 or 3% that are out there committing these heinous crimes against law enforcement, targeting them, ambushing them. Not only law enforcement, but the American people alike. We must stop this. We must come together as a country, support our men and women in blue. Let's take back our streets. Take them back today, and we can do it if we're unified and we're together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Well, listen, in closing, let me say, I don't believe there's a better week that we could bring this bill forward than National Police Memorial Week. When I think about all the names of the men and women who are on the wall over at the police memorial, I can't help but think of the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said the purpose in life is not to be happy, it's to be useful, it's to be honorable, it's to be compassionate, it's to have it make some difference that you lived, and you lived well. I can tell you those men and women on that wall, they lived well. And the men and women, and the men standing behind me here today, and the women in Congress as well that support, protect, and serve, I can tell you, we're going to send the message to the criminal element out there. If you're going to target the police, this Congress is going to target you.
Amen.
And with that, we thank you for being here.
Good job, Sheriff.
Thank you, guys.